Welcome to today's first session. It's a great pleasure to introduce Yuval Dolev, who's going to talk on the relationship between randomness in nature and the experiences of the future's openness. Please, Yuval.
Thank you, Sven. Is this working? Is it working? No? We'll do it without? It is working? Okay. So, first of all, thank you, the organizers, for this belated but wonderful gathering. Thank you for inviting me. It's a bit of an experimental kind of talk. We'll see how it goes. I thought I'd start with a little experiment. You're a tough audience for it because you're all mathematicians and physicists. You may know this already, but I'd like you to, if you have a piece of paper, imagine that you're flipping a coin 20 times. You just write down the results, but do it in your imagination. 20 times. Take 30 seconds or less. 2 seconds per flip. Gotta get a string of 20 heads or tails. You got it, Sven? All right. It doesn't really matter if you did it or not because I'd have to do it individually. But I would now go ahead and guess the results you've received. And this is supposed to be a paradigm of a random sequence, I am assuming, right? Because you just flip coins. I have made a few bucks off of this from my students, from small children. I may have had some success with some of you here as well. Now, try to answer honestly. How many of you have a streak of more than 4 heads or 4 tails inside this? Yeah, obviously Fred, but I knew you would. I knew you would. You got all that. All right. So actually, Fred's results are really random. The rest of you, if you did not have a streak of more than 3 heads or tails, then I would have probably made a few, because the way you play this, just so that you know what to do in your next class, for each guess, you ask a student or someone to put $1. You put $1. If you guess correctly, you take the $2. If you didn't, they take the $2. At some point, you raise the stakes. You can at some point even put $100 with a fair degree of certainty that you'll win. Because very, very few people put streaks of, when people are asked to imagine random sequences, usually they don't go beyond streaks of 3 or 4 heads or tails, which means that actually, not working this thing? Again? Okay, I'll tell you what's in the next slide. So obviously there's 2 to the 20 possibilities, which is roughly 1,400,000 permutations. And if you're limited to streaks of less than of 3 or less, then you're actually pulling your guess out of a subset of about 240,000 permutations. So you're limiting yourself to less than 24% of the possibilities, which means that no, and the microphone. Which means that your guess is somewhat predictable. You're not going to get 20, but you're going to get more than 10. Try this. It works. You get 11, 12, 13. And if for example, you've hit a streak of 2 or 3, you can be pretty certain on your guess of the 4th. Put $100 there to make a lot of money. This one? This works? Okay. This doesn't work either. All right. So, so it means that it's somewhat predictable and therefore not very random, because randomness, at least an essential part of randomness, is it's being unpredictable. But unpredictability obviously is not enough. Many systems in nature are not predictable, but are not random. The weather and the stock exchange and the spread of COVID and your relationships, many things that happen are not predictable.
but are not exactly random. So what else is needed for randomness? It's indeterminateness, right? When we say that something is genuinely random, we're speaking about indeterminateness. And maybe quantum systems are truly indeterminate. Quantum random number generators are thought to be genuinely random in the sense that the result of, say, photon having to pass through a splitter going left or right is genuinely random. I'll get back to that, but I'm at least not satisfied that I understand what it means to say that something is truly indeterminate. So if randomness has to do with indeterminateness, we have to figure out what indeterminateness means. And is this working? Okay. And okay, what I will want to suggest here forget it. We'll do it without. You already gave a talk without a presentation, right? You did. Went okay. We'll do it. So what does it mean to say that something is indeterminate? I will suggest speculatively, as you said, that it has to do with deliberation, with the human experience of deliberation, that we can't understand randomness, can't understand indeterminateness, and therefore cannot understand randomness without the experience of deliberation regarding future action. So that's what I'm going to want to suggest. More broadly, I'm a realist about tense and passage. I believe the world really has a past, a present, and a future. I must say, after several decades of trying to understand the claims to the contrary, I am still now managing to do so. So it's a constitutive element of reality that there is a future and also that the future is open. I don't think this is just psychology, and I think we need it for the understanding of various notions such as randomness. Just a few preliminaries, and I thank Carl for at least one of them. So I want to say a few very general words about science and phenomenology, or science and experience. First, I believe that there is no conflict. It's very rare that there is a conflict or even tension between what science tells us about the world and how we experience it. So some paradigmatic examples would be, for example, temporal direction. So there's a lot of discussion about the absence of temporal directionality from physics due to the time reversal invariance of the laws of nature, if that is indeed a fact about them. And that supposedly introduces a gulf between how we experience the world as temporally directed and how it's presented to us by physics as lacking such a direction. I think all we can learn from the existence of such a gap, if indeed there is such a gap, is that physics is what some people call incomplete. Namely, there's a feature of reality that is not represented by physics, and I don't find that very troubling. It's only if you assume that everything that is in the world has to somehow be expressed or represented or given a place inside your scientific theories, maybe even inside physics, that you'll be troubled. But I think the vast majority of things that we experience and we care about in the world are not formulatable within physics. And that says nothing bad about physics. Physics is absolutely perfect as it is. It's only if we set an unrealistic and probably unjustified bar for physics or for science that we may be disappointed by the fact that not everything is in it. Now, the absence of a conflict can be taken in to the other direction. For example, Deeks believes that if there's no tense in special relativity, then there's no tense in experience. And those of you who are familiar with his work, that's what he argues there. There never was a problem to reconcile special relativity with our experience of time, because we experience time exactly the way time is portrayed in special relativity. And if there's no tense and passage in the theory, there's no tense and passage in how we experience it. So it has a, at any rate, the idea is the same idea. There can't be a conflict between phenomenology or experience and science. Maybe because science presupposes experience, right? Science is empirical, and science is done by physicists who experience the world like everybody else does. And their experience of the world is maybe the only input on which they can rely when they're doing their science. So there can't be a conflict. And again, that can go in both ways. Either not worry about physics not giving expression to everything we find in experience, or trying to squeeze experience, massage it in such a way that it will fit exactly what we find within our theories. I think that's not a good policy. But at any rate, trying to devise models or arguments to eliminate a tension that isn't there may be redundant. Another reason for thinking about the relationship between phenomenology, experience, and science would be philosophical clarity. So maybe the objective is not removing tensions, but attaining what we all seek, that evasive thing that we're addicted to, philosophical clarity. But then again, I'm not sure that trying to formulate models that somehow mesh together physics and metaphysics is the way to go about it. I think phenomenology has had a very good track record in terms of generating philosophical clarity of the kind that we want. Okay, so just a little addition. And again, this has been remarked to me before. There's no hostility whatsoever on my part towards science or physics, or to the contrary. I'm an immense admirer of science and of its practitioners, and try to the best of my limited abilities to keep track of what's going on there. It's how science is being recruited within philosophical agenda that I often feel uneasy about and oppose. So again, I take, that's the second point, I take everyday experience and everyday language to be monumentally important for philosophy. Often they're marginalized or pushed aside, sometimes in the name of science, as being inaccurate, unreliable, leading to mistakes, or belonging to the man on the street, as he's referred to, for example, in that Putnam paper that's been mentioned a couple of times. There's a different school in philosophy, I'm sure you're all familiar with, which takes everyday experience, everyday language to be our guide, the lighthouse in whose light we should advance when we're doing philosophy. And if we look at how we experience the world and how we speak about it, think about it, and so on, past, present, and future passage are there, and they're not removable, they're not eliminable, and specifically, the future is there. So when we're thinking about these two faces of time, the tensed face or tense relations and the tenseless relations, I think we need to acknowledge at least that they're both in there in the way we go about doing our business daily and the way we speak, think, including when we speak and think in philosophical context or scientific context or mathematical context for that matter. And a future, an open future, is there. So the AB theory debate, again, has been flabbergasting me for a very long time. I don't think A relations are eliminable from anything, nor are tenseless relations. Every time we think, encounter an event, it doesn't matter what the event is. It can be in a laboratory, it can be in the street. It's tensely located with respect to other events. It's before and after some other events. And it's always, invariably, either past or present or future. Even when we imagine things, even imagined events or dreamed events are always presented to us as either past, present, and future. We cannot eliminate the past, present, future from events any more than we can. You can look at what's up on the screen there and not see the word blue, or not see the color blue. You cannot, in a written word, you cannot just peel off the meaning or the shape. So the shape is there. Take that to be the analogy of a tenseless relationship. And the meaning is there. Take that to be the parallel of the tense relationship. And there's no mental exercise you can perform in order to get rid of one of them. So I updated my slideshow this morning, but it's the old version that went up. Sorry. In the updated version, there's a little dog here. And what I wanted to say was you can't peel off the dogness from the dog. It's just going to be a dog there, regardless of what you try to do to it. So tenseless and tense relations are there. They're intertwined. They're not separable. We can attend to one of these aspects and ignore another if the context calls for it. For example, when we want to mathematize motion, that's the way to do it. We focus on the tenseless aspects of motion. So it's okay to think of motion as the occupation of subsequent locations in space at subsequent times. That's how we would mathematize it. But to reduce motion to that is to lose what makes motion motion. And similarly, if we ignore the tenseless aspect of motion, just focus on motion being comprised of a stage which is past, and then when a stage which is present, and so on, and ignore that past, present, future also have this tenseless relation between them, again, we lose something which is not eliminable from how we experience things moving. So, okay, it's not something I want to go into now, but again, for decades now, I've been trying to argue that A and B theories stem from grow out of a joint prejudice, which is an ontological prejudice, namely the thought that we need to understand time through reality claims to the effect of what is and what is not real. And I don't think we get very far down this venue. It's an important one for phenomenological reasons that we could discuss later, but it can't be the last stop. It can't be where our inquiry ends in thesis such as everything exists, not at the same time, but on some kind of ontological par, or only the present exists. If we go with only the present exists, then as has been indicated here yesterday, that kind of commits us to, unless we want this to collapse to eternalism, that kind of commits us to the non-existence of a past, not now, but ever. It's not that the past doesn't exist now. There never was a past, because if we accept that there's a past, but one that doesn't exist now, we're eternalists. Essentially, that's eternalism. To deny past, present, future, and claim they're just psychological, I think, doesn't cohere with how we experience, think, and talk. And if the experience and thinking and so on were just part of philosophy, maybe that wouldn't matter much. But it's how we experience, think, speak about things that are really crucial to us. So we have to be careful before we go down train of thought that may lead us to the conclusion that something about how we go about, for example, deliberating morally and ethically is irrational. I think there's something in that spirit in Parfit, maybe in J.J. Smart. Parfit, I think, if you recall, Parfit's character, Timeless, is the only rational character, according to him. So if you understand that the world is tenseless, you're irrational if you allow the past, present, and future to figure in how you live. And I don't think we can reformulate, for example, our moral deliberations in a way that is tenseless. Try it. So again, events, as we encounter them, invariably are before and after, but also past, present, future. And that's, I think, we need to take that as an axiom almost when we try to do a philosophy of time. Okay, so just to remind us, I want to argue that randomness presupposes indeterminateness, and indeterminateness is a notion that to understand, we need to introduce an open future, which is okay to do because our understanding of time should be tensed and include a past, present, future passage, and so on. But what does it mean to say that the future is open? If we're realists about the future, and I'll talk a bit about realism a bit later, if I'll have some time left. And here's where I understand I'm going into somewhat dangerous territory, especially here. And to do it without glasses at my age is even more dangerous. So, okay, this I've already discussed. I'm trying to suggest that we should free ourselves from this imposition to choose. You're either an A theorist or a B theorist. It's very present, this forced choice. For example, in Putnam's paper, he doesn't have an argument for the tenseless theory. He has an argument against the reality of passage. And it's only if you're committed to either this or that from the unreality of passage, you can derive an argument defending the tenseless view. Yeah, that's the old version. The parentheses weren't supposed to be there, but I thank you for that. This is just a question, another survey. So you claim that the B theory suffers from bad publicity. I've always thought that it's the presentists who are in a very small minority and have to confront a pretty massive onslaught from the rival camp. Am I wrong about this, just in terms of numbers? I think, all right, we should conduct such a survey. Chalmers and who distribute these surveys? Most of you probably got them. One of the questions in the survey that Chalmers and his colleague conducted last year had to do with this. Are you an A theorist or B theorist? And we have a pretty authoritative answer there. I think it's the B theorists who are the majority. Okay. So the openness of the future. We can think of the openness of the future tenselessly or tensely, and by a tenseless understanding of the openness of the open future, I take it that the idea is that in some ontological sense, there are future possibilities waiting metaphorically. It's a psychological thing, but as we go through our days, we encounter these intersections where we have to make a choice, go straight, right, left, whatever it is. And in some sense, the roads are already there. It's just that one of them will become actualized, others are going to stay as possibilities. And that requires that we give some account as to what it means to say that something is possible as opposed to actual. And at any rate, this understanding of the open future, I think, is spatial in the way that the tenseless understanding of time is spatial, what Bergson called geometric. So Bergson has a lengthy discussion of the geometric understanding. I think by geometric, he understood one that could be displayed in this form. Lines intersect, lines branching out from a certain point on a trajectory. And it's a metaphysical question, ontological question. If you take your theory of time to be an ontological theory, what do you mean when you say that there are future possibilities? I can't make sense of any other option other than taking those future possibilities that are not going to be actualized as being just psychological. It's kind of maybe noise in one's head that is present when we deliberate. But at any rate, we need to get a grip on what we mean when we say that the future exists in a tenseless sense, if we want to introduce into this future more options than those that are actually going to happen. In general, I think it's very hard to separate the tenseless view from determinism. And if I'm wrong about this, I'd like to hear. But if you're a tenseless theorist, then you need to take all times as existing equally, and are dubbing some of these events as past, others as present, and others as future really has to do with how we speak and think about them, not about how they really are. It's not about reality, it's about how we take reality to be. And in reality, to have more than one option, one future option, is something that I think is hard to get a grip on. So I think if we think about the open future tenselessly, it really collapses to psychology. This, in passing, I want to note, precludes interpreting the future's openness integrating or introducing the future's openness into, for example, intuitionistic mathematics. Those of you who got a chance to look at Posey's recent book, in which he introduces intuitionism, will encounter there his claim that intuitionistic mathematics really embodies full temporality. And he points there to a real past, the preset initial segment of a sequence, a genuine present, and a genuinely open future. But I think that doesn't work. I think Posey's intuitionistic mathematics is tenseless, and as tenseless the genuine temporality that you find there is really psychological. So you have a feeling of an open future, but you can't claim that mathematically the future really is open as intuitionists would like to have it. Nicolas Gissin, in a paper from last year, tries to employ intuitionistic mathematics for the sake of opening physics and rendering physics indeterministic, quantum physics indeterministic, by reformulating it on the basis of intuitionistic mathematics rather than classical mathematics. So those of you familiar with his work know he argues that relying on real analysis and doing physics commits us to determinism. Nicolas is not an indeterminist. He shows in a previous paper that indeterminism can be introduced into, or that physics is indeterministic because in practice, physicists never use more than what he calls finite information numbers. In practice, both in theory and in experiment, the only real math that is being used is finite math, and therefore physics is indeterministic. You need to introduce numbers that can encode an infinite amount of information, real numbers, in order to get physics to be deterministic. That's in a previous paper. Now, in a subsequent paper, he argues for a more ambitious claim, namely that physics can actually be mathematically indeterministic if it is reformulated by means of intuitionistic mathematics. For that, intuitionistic mathematics has to be indeterminate, and I don't think that it is. So if we want a real open future, we need the other phase of time, namely the tense phase. And what we run into there is the experience of deliberation. Now, there's a subtle point here. We need to, or I need to establish that the tenses are not psychological. Otherwise, I'll be repeating with respect to the tense aspect of time what I just said about the tenses. About tenseless openness, namely that it's psychological. But if you agree to think about passage and tense as not psychological, but as objective and real, things we should be realist about as we are about anything else, photons, electrons, chairs, birds, and so on, then the question is, how do we encounter the future's openness? And I would suggest that we encounter it in situations in which we have to deliberate, facing a dilemma, and take a decision. These could be infantile situations, such as when a 3-year-old has to choose between, I don't know, the red lollipop or the yellow lollipop, or serious deliberations, such as how to handle a pandemic, how to allocate funds for various purposes, and so on. There, we really encounter the openness of the future. I'm sure you're all familiar with this pressure, right, of sitting and having to choose. You know, I'm going here, I'm going there. Sometimes it's silly, sometimes it's not, but it's a taxing kind of experience. And that's where we run, and that's why we believe that the future is open. So when we reflect on these kind of deliberations, I think we can isolate at least 3 parameters: how much we care about the issue, what degree of power we can act on it, how much influence we can have it. We have no influence about the weather, almost no influence, and how predictable it is. Predictability is time relative, right? Our ability to predict grows as science advances. So things that were utterly unpredictable for unknown reasons are now either predictable or unpredictable, but for known reasons. So we know, many systems are chaotic. They're not predictable, but they're deterministic. So my suggestion is Randomness has to do with unpredictability and with what's being observed being indeterminate, but for reasons that we do not know. We do not have an account for why we cannot predict. Okay, so these are two separate elements. Something can be unpredictable, but we may know why it's unpredictable, or be unpredictable. That may render randomness culture relative. So things that we take as random may not seem random 100 years from now, just as some things that we know are not random probably appeared random 100 years ago. And that's okay. Which brings me to my last point. So as you understand, I give a very central place to how we experience things as human beings. It's kind of human-centric. But phenomenology is human-centric. The whole purpose of phenomenology is to get us to understand how, from an inescapably subjective viewpoint on reality, we do attain an understanding of objective reality. And the fact that we have to rely on experience shouldn't deter us here. It's not something we can eliminate. This reliance on deliberate. Not having a screen in front of me is confusing. Not having or having to rely on experience shouldn't weaken our stance as realists. The meter rod in Paris, or whatever current equivalent we're using, is essential for spatial measurement. Spatial measurement is essential for spatiality. I don't think we can understand the notion of space other than as something in which we can measure the distance between 2 points. And for performing measurements, we need to, by convention, set a standard. You cannot take the standard out of spatiality, even though it is grounded in a human choice. And I don't think we can take what we learn from experience out of our understanding of reality. It will be there. Much of how we describe reality will employ terms that are anchored and grounded in how we experience, and again, irremovably so. So my proposal is indeterminateness has to do with unpredictability, but randomness has to do with unpredictability, but also with indeterminateness. Indeterminateness has to do with having an open future. The future's openness is given to us through how we experience it in situations in which we have to make choices. And that ties randomness to those situations through a certain chain of reasoning, but it's still randomness nonetheless. And it's randomness in nature. And the fact that how we understand randomness, or what we take to be random, may shift with time is just part of how things are, The appearance of non-Euclidean geometry is often mentioned as an argument against Kant, who takes Euclidean geometry to be a priori and therefore universal and necessary, right? I think that the situation here is somewhat similar. You can cut me off once my time is out. So what's necessary and what's not necessary is also time relative. Kant was not wrong when he made the claims that he made to make. It was not wrong on his part to make them. It would be preposterous for anybody in Kant's time to claim that whatever thesis of any non-Euclidean geometry of your choice. I mean, people would look at him and or at her and not understand what's being said. It was okay to say that it's necessary that parallel lines never meet in the 17th century or 18th century, maybe even early 19th century. But then a new geometry shows up, and the line separating the necessary from the contingent shifts, and the line separating the random from the determinate may also shift, does actually shift. I mean, this goes back to the opening lecture about how things shift with time in history. So to sum up, I think we should be realists about time and passage. The fact that our realism will have to do with how we experience things doesn't weaken it as a form of realism. And when we try to think what randomness means, even in the case of coin flips or of quantum measurements, if we trace it back, we'll reach those same points of origin that are our experience, because we do not have any other place to start from. Thank you.
Thank you. So I just wanted to ask, when it comes to the two natures or two phases of time, as you described them, the tenseless and the tensed, do you think that they might be studied using maybe different methodologies? So maybe using different methodologies. So can the tenseless, so can we say that science only focuses on the tenseless, and then the tensed can be studied using phenomenology? So we separate them in a way, and then instead of saying, oh, time, when you talk about time simplicity, we have to only take science, otherwise it's an illusion. So maybe separating the two concepts and focusing on the methodology of each one can help settle this issue, so each can take their lot and be happy with it in a way.
Yeah, that's exactly what I think. I think special relativity brought immense surprises to how we understand tenseless relations, and but really says absolutely nothing about the tensed aspect of time. And as I'm sure all of you know, that troubled Einstein. In that famous quotation from Carnap's autobiography, where Carnap reports that Einstein was deeply worried about the absence of the now from physics. Carnap dismisses him there, but Einstein was troubled by it. And it's true of Putnam, who was mentioned here a couple of times yesterday. So his paper is from '67. As all of you know, he's evolved quite a bit in the almost 50 years or 40-something years of work he did after. And it was pretty shortly after that paper that he abandoned the thesis that he defends there. So yeah, I think the tensed aspects are studied very effectively in phenomenology, and science has a lot to say about the tenseless. But about the philosophical issue, what is time? Is time just tenseless relations? Is it only tense relations? Can we reduce the one to the other? That's a philosophical question, which I think should be answered phenomenologically, and then as a byproduct of it, yeah, let's separate methodologies and let science do the tenseless things, because amazing things come out of it.
Yeah, so one of the things you were saying is that our experience of deliberation gives us the open future. I was wondering whether it is actually so, whether it gives us a metaphysically open future or just an epistemic phenomenon, because there is all these problems in decision theory, like Newcomb problems or problems of foreknowledge, and where our action has been predicted in advance, and we can suppose perfectly, so that we know, as a matter of fact, that everything is set and there is no open future. But we can still deliberate, and in fact, the phenomenology of deliberation is the same, but we know there is no open future because we know our choice has been predicted, but still we have to choose which box to take. And if that's so, then deliberation has to do with the fact that we don't know maybe what we're going to do, not that there is no answer as to what we're going to do.
Yeah. So, if you're a determinist, I think the chances of you moving you from there are very slim, and vice versa. So people don't, unlike Putnam, for example, people certainly in philosophy don't tend to change their views very often. Many of our actions are very well predictable. In many of the things we do without any deliberation. Newcomb's problem maybe is a kind of a paradox. I don't know, but it relies, I think, on a certain degree of, at the moment, science fiction, to the extent that prediction technologies, or technologies that predict human behavior, advance significantly to the point of, then it will really be a paradox. I mean, if someone creates a machine that will predict with a very, very high degree of success how you're going to vote next time, yeah, it will be a different world. I have no idea what we're going to think about, what it means to be human in such a world and so on. We're far away from it at the moment. And at the moment, there are very many, very real deliberations. So, you know, Newcomb's problem, it's like the argument from illusion. It's kind of an extreme case. It's a very interesting setup, but it does not establish that there aren't real situations with real possibilities that we need to choose from.
Thank you. As an atheist, I enjoyed your spirited defense of the view, but I want to try and, I sense that we differ on some sort of fundamental conception of the view, and I just want to try and tease that out. Although your final comments on Kant, I think, helped me to understand where we might differ. So you mentioned the two faces and the sort of false opposition that's presented between the A and B theories at the start of the talk. You know, my understanding is that the views are contradictory, you know, only one of the two. So I want to sort of figure out a little bit about what you would say. So is it your view that in some sense that there's an absolute present, or that my own preferred understanding of the A theory would be that the truths change in some sense, that there are temporary facts. The world doesn't, you know, the facts of the world don't just consist in eternal or timeless truths, something like that. Is it your view that were there no cognizers, or were there cognizers very different to us? The question of whether there are temporary truths or whether all truths are eternal might differ as well.
Yeah. So it's a big question, and I have a very, very long, several hundred pages long answer to this, which I can't. I'll just give the beginning. So, not to disappoint her, I don't take myself to be an atheist at all. I mean, I oppose this theory as vehemently as I do the B theory, and I said I think it's a forced choice between two options. I don't want to call them bad options, but let's call them initial options. They're good starting points for the investigation. Neither of them should be the terminal point of the investigation. And what I don't like about both of them, I mentioned it, was that they're both fleshed out in terms of ontological claims or reality claims as to what exists and what doesn't exist. I don't think these claims make sense on either side of their formulation. When tenseless theorists say, you know, past and future events exist on a par, on an ontological par, or have the same status as present event, I don't understand that. And when atheists say past events don't exist, or future, I don't understand that either. So I think this existence talk or reality talk is a wrong road to go down. And again, it's not part of how we experience, think, and that needs to be fleshed out in much more detail than I can do now. But if you reflect on language and on experience, you won't find these ontological divisions there. So I don't think, you know, they're an imposition that we, when we do metaphysics, introduce into the discussion. If we try to stay purists with respect to our commitment to ordinary language, which is a bad phrase to use. I was warned 25 years ago, never use these words when you write a paper. And but if we are purists about it, then we can avoid going into this ontological path, which I think is a dead end. And the answer to your follow-up questions there about, you know, facts shifting or truths changing and so on, other sentient beings will follow from that. But in a nutshell, I'm a very staunch realist. So I think the world is the way we human beings perceive it. This has to be qualified, but yeah.
Thank you. So this question's kind of got two aspects. Some of the things you said about decisions seem to have a lot of compatibility or sympathy with things Janan Ishmael has said. So she sort of says that agents making decisions necessarily can't know certain aspects of the future if those aspects of the future are the outcomes of the decisions. But so one question is, you know, do you have any comments on how what you want to say relates to what Janan says? But the other follow-on is that what she says seems completely compatible with determinism. So it's not clear why you're then saying that the very idea of open futures, if you're going to say something similar to Janan, requires something like indeterminateness or indeterminism.
I need to review some of her more recent work to give a reliable answer to your question. I know that Janan has much interest and sympathy to the phenomenological investigations into time. And at the same time, yeah, a certain kind of commitment to Spinoza type determinism, perhaps. But I can't give a more detailed answer because I'm not familiar enough. Compatibilism on the issue of free will is again something I'm not very sympathetic to. You want to defend free will, and free will in a deterministic world still sounds to me, I'm aware of perhaps a certain kind of simplicity in my thinking about these things, but free will in a deterministic world was never very appealing to me or persuasive. I think compatibilism is a cop-out. If you're a determinist, but you want to still defend some kind of notion of free will, that's where you go. But, a genuinely open future is hard to defend because I think it is a cultural, time-related thing. At present, it immediately puts you in a kind of anti-scientific camp, which is not a place anybody would want to be in. Certainly not me. But I don't think, you know, the relegation of people who are insistent that time is real, passage is real, past, present, future are real, an open future is real, should put you in that camp. I think there's a way to defend these things and still acknowledge the immense role and importance and even political significance of science. Science being bashed these days by various people is a huge danger. But I'm not sure that a certain kind of defense of science as the face of everything is very effective in view of these attacks.
Okay. There's a lot I would like to say, but I need to be very quick. So in theory, I should be on your side. I really love phenomenology. I really love paying attention to language, and the fact that there are languages without grammatical tense is extremely interesting, and there are things to be said there. I also think that there's a forced choice that we need to avoid between presentism and eternalism. There are a number of other views, one of which I've spent the last 10 years defending, that don't treat those as the two options. But if we're going to be doing phenomenology and paying attention to ordinary language, a lot of the things that you've said, I think, need to be questioned. In particular, so deliberation isn't the only form of choice. Sometimes we choose things without deliberating. And in many cases, it looks like we deliberately do things precisely because we think we have no other choice. And so it looks like being responsible for our actions, being reasons responsive, having what the Greeks would call ephauto, it being up to us, seems perfectly compatible with only having one option that's morally acceptable. And so not having any room for deliberation because there's only one option that even makes sense as an option. So I wanted to put that to you.
No, I absolutely agree with everything you say. I have no misgivings about any of it. There's a lot of work to do. It's painstaking and has to be done with a lot of attention. The other options you mentioned are certainly there and very important. I think many cases in which morally we feel that we do not have another option, we come to this realization after some kind of deliberation. Maybe there are cases where our guts simply pose before us. Yeah. No, I agree with all of them. Absolutely.
That allows us to have a last question from Carl.
It's not necessary because comments that you've all made in response to others answered what I was going to ask. You were using indeterminateness in a way that I thought, do you mean indeterminism? And yes.
Well, I couldn't.
You used the word indeterminateness.
Yeah.
Where I was thinking, I think that he means indeterminism, which would lead to the open future.
Who are you talking about?
You.
Oh. I used indeterminateness rather than indeterminism.
Yes.
What? Yeah.
Yeah.
And I should say indeterminism rather than indeterminateness.
Or it yeah.
Depends on what I mean. Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, but we can talk more.
I can clarify that if it's important. Nah, indeterminism is a metaphysical position that, for example, Nicolas Gisson would like to defend and others as well. Indeterminateness is how I would characterize a certain aspect of the future. I mean, I use them interchangeably. When I say the future is open, I mean that in certain contexts, it's indeterminate what's going to happen. Is that my English may be working against me here? I'll appreciate a clarification there. It may be my poor command of this language.
Well, let us thank Yuval for a great talk.